Welcome to the Animal Law Podcast. This is Marianne Sullivan. My guest this week is Christina Stella of the Animal Legal Defense Fund. She'll be discussing a fascinating case which is rooted in a provision of the California State Constitution governing water use, which is, of course, a very big deal in California. And I have to say that even I was shocked to find out the amount of water it takes to slaughter chickens. I wasn't shocked about the hideous cruelty involved. And, you know, in these times of dire, extreme drought, it really is pretty shocking to find out how poor communities in California's Central Valley are suffering as a result of the amount of water used to kill these poor birds. So before we get to that interview, I hope you will also check out the Our Hen House podcast, which I co-host along with Jasmine Singer. I mean, I don't want you to check it out before you listen to this interview, but I do want you to check it out after that. And some recent episodes that might be of interest include episode 601 with Aisha Akhtar, who's heading up the Center for Contemporary Sciences. And she had some really very hopeful things to say about the battle to get animals out of laboratories and how modern science is actually helping that effort. Episode 599 has an amazing interview with Seb Alex. Wow, you really have to listen to this. He's a Lebanese activist, passionate. And he talks about lots of things, but particularly about the vegan and animal rights scene in Beirut and beyond. And then episode 602 with Thomas Goodwin is about the organization he founded, Plant Dining Partnerships, which is working at a grassroots level to get more vegan options in restaurants. And I am all for that. And I'd also like to take a moment to ask for your support for the Animal Law Podcast and the Our Hen House podcast. If you are right now in a place where you can help out, please go to ourhenhouse.org/donate. There you can join our flock for $10 a month or $100 a year. You can also make a one-time donation in any amount that is comfortable for you, and we would be so grateful for that. Okay, let's get to this interview because it's really interesting. As a managing attorney at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, Christina Stella litigates on behalf of farmed, wild, and captive animals who are subjected to systemic cruelty and exploitation in commercial industries. Her cases primarily focus on increasing transparency in the industrial agriculture system and challenging industrial agricultural practices that harm animals, the environment, and public health. Christina also teaches animal law as an adjunct professor at the University of California Davis School of Law, and she's the co-author of the investigative report, America's Secret Animal Drug Problem, How Lack of Transparency is Endangering Human Health and Animal Welfare. And she will be joining me right after this. I want to tell you about an amazing service for anybody who's practicing animal law or interested in animal law. The Brooks Animal Law Digest is a premier, free online publication dedicated to offering in-depth and up-to-date coverage on today's most important animal law and policy issues. Published weekly as a collaborative effort with Harvard Law School's Animal Law and Policy program, the Digest is a Brooks Institute service to the animal protection community. It can be like having a full-time lawyer on your staff researching and reporting to you on U.S. current legal developments related to animal protection issues. This digest is a resource for anyone interested in learning more about the field of animal law, either as a high-level overview of weekly developments for those who are focused on specific work, but nevertheless want to stay aware of other actions, or as a jumping-off point for digging into a specific current issue in the field. Features include allowing you to compile updates by category, search by key terms, and each issue contains links to background materials that will orient the reader around that specific issue. There are weekly highlights as well as quarterly summaries. You can subscribe to the Brooks Animal Law Digest at thebrooksinstitute.org. Welcome to the Animal Law Podcast, Christina.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have you. We've been trying to put together this interview on this case, which is really interesting. It's really a different twist, and we've been trying to put it together for a while, so I'm very pleased that we're finally talking about it. And, you know, only in animal law would you be happy to be talking about chicken slaughter, but that's what we're talking about. And just tell us about the Foster Farms Chicken Slaughterhouse. This is in Livingston, California. Give us an idea of how big it is and how many chickens it slaughters. And since the case revolves around water, how much water does it use?
Yeah, so the Foster Farms Slaughterhouse, like you said, is located in Livingston, California. So for folks who aren't familiar with California, that's in the Central Valley or the San Joaquin Valley, which is the central part of our state. It's an area that's increasingly prone to drought. It's actually in the middle of a mega drought and suffers from persistent drought, which will continue to occur as, we're continually affected by climate change. It's in an area that's a very heavily factory farm. There's a huge volume of factory farms in that area. And the slaughterhouse in particular, that's located in Livingston, uses 65% of Livingston's water supply. So it uses 3 to 4 million gallons of drinkable water every day. Just to put that in context, there are 5 different Nestle bottled water facilities all around the state, and combined, all 5 of those facilities use just under 2 million gallons a day. So that's for 5 different plants throughout the state. So Foster Farms is using, double that amount just for one plant in one city. Livingston, like I said, is located in this area of the state that is, suffering from drought and heat waves. The wells in the city are contaminated with arsenic, lots of other chemicals, and water is a really scarce resource in this area. So the amount that Foster Farms is using is really egregious kind of in the context of this geographic area.
So what are they mainly using the water for? And why does it require this unbelievable amount of water?
Yeah, so one of the things that they're using the water for is what's known as live hang slaughter, and it specifically uses something called electric immobilization. So just to kind of explain the process, when chickens and other birds are brought to this slaughterhouse, they're taken off the trucks, they're shackled to move through the slaughter line, and as part of that, they are taken through an electrified water bath. That is meant to basically render them immobile. It's supposed to render them unconscious, but we're not sure that it actually does that. But it does render them immobile so that they're kind of stunned and can move through the rest of the slaughter line, of course, including the step where their throats are slit, in a uniform manner. And then after that, they're processed through a defeathering bath, and then they are further processed to kind of clean the carcasses after they've been slaughtered. So that's leaving out some parts of the slaughter process, but kind of highlighting the points at which water is used. So animals who are brought through this live hang slaughter system are handled while they're alive. Obviously, they're terrified. They could be being handled roughly. And so they basically kind of make a mess. They could be thrashing. They often defecate and vomit on themselves. And I say all that to explain that then it requires more water at the end of the slaughter process to clean their bodies because they're in such bad shape from having been handled in that way and just subjected to the stress of the slaughter line.
Yeah, it's a horrible story to start off this case with. But that's really what it's all about.
Yeah.
So where do they get the water? Where does water come from in the Central Valley in California?
Yeah, so Foster Farms buys water from the city of Livingston, and the city of Livingston pulls the water from the Merced subbasin. So this is a critically overdrafted subbasin, which basically means that it's recognized by the California water regulators to be overdrafted in the sense that if its water extraction continues at the rate that it's extracted today, it will have long-term social, economic, or environmental consequences for the area. So it's not a sustainable water source, but that's where Foster Farms water is coming from. It's pulling groundwater from the subbasin.
And you had mentioned briefly climate change, and you talked about it in the complaint as well, with some predictions about how much worse this situation will get. I'm kind of wondering, has the situation worsened even since, I'm not sure when you filed this complaint, but it seems like things are just so awful everywhere. I'm just wondering whether things are already getting worse.
Yes, we filed the lawsuit in 2020, in the fall of 2020. And as anyone who lives in California knows, we're facing another summer of, persistent drought, heat waves, of course, wildfires. The situation in California is definitely becoming more dire, it seems, with every passing year. And the Central Valley is in a mega drought and is expected to continue in a drought, if not worsen, over the long term. I don't know the exact numbers of the water that's available last year to this year, but it's definitely recognized as a persistent problem that's expected to get worse every year.
Yeah, it's really hard to believe it's going to get better, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So, given this pretty dire situation, I mean, I assume this is a poor area, and the people who live there are not well off. And I'm just wondering, why is it that Livingston is selling so much of its water? Is it because they absolutely need the money? Is it properly priced? Is there any corruption involved, or are you really not privy to those kinds of details?
We're not privy to those details. They certainly go kind of beyond what we've alleged in the complaint. But I can say, the Central Valley, like I said, is very heavily saturated with factory farms and slaughterhouses. And so I think it's an area of the state that the industry just takes advantage of. And Foster Farms actually has a history of depleting and degrading Livingston's water too. So previously, before Foster Farms built its own treatment plant, it actually was using the Livingston treatment plant, which was located right along the Merced River. And that, municipal treatment plant was exclusively devoted to treating the slaughterhouse's wastewater. And then actually in 2006, the California Regional Water Quality Board issued a cease and desist order to the plant because it had such persistent violations and documented pollution to the groundwater, and then also some other issues too. But then Livingston and Foster Farms actually litigated against each other, basically to figure out who should be responsible for the cost of the required upgrades and remediation. And so as a result of that, Foster Farms agreed to construct its own treatment plant and to stop using Livingston's. So, and now Foster Farms regularly violates its water discharge permit. So a little bit different from, why is Livingston allowing Foster Farms to use so much water? But I think it just speaks to kind of the history there, where Foster Farms is, has been a longtime player in this community and has a really long track record of kind of just taking advantage of the community and the resources that it's been supplied.
Yeah, it sounds like a dire situation. Speaking of treatment, so Foster Farms is treating the water, which, I mean, it has to be treated. So this is the wastewater, because they do all these horrible things to these chickens, and the water is filthy. And then so then they collect that wastewater and they treat it. And is that right? And what happens to that water? And do they just return the amount of water that they took, or is that water does it become drinkable? What happens? What happens after the treatment?
Yes, these are all great questions. So Foster Farms does not return the same amount of water that it takes. So of the water that it takes, so first of all, the water that it gets from the city of Livingston is drinkable quality, and it still puts it to this purpose of slaughtering chickens. So it's using drinkable water, and then it, like you said, it becomes wastewater, and then it is treated. I can't quite remember all of the details. I think it's to remove suspended solids first, and then it's applied to kind of the wastewater discharge fields that Foster Farms has. I think it's just under 230 acres of a wastewater discharge field. And that means that it literally just applies the wastewater to that field and then kind of lets nature do its thing. So 30 to 40% of the water that Foster Farms takes out of the aquifer or the subbasin is permanently lost. And then it returns 60 to 70% to the subbasin through these wastewater discharge fields. So that water is lost in a variety of ways, one of which is just from being applied to fields, it evaporates or it runs off to other places. It doesn't actually end up, recharging the subbasin. And the water that it does return is not of drinkable quality. It's still wastewater. So it's taking out a higher quality of water than it's putting back, and also a higher quantity than it's putting back.
So what would be the city's, is the city allowed to just refuse to sell them water? I mean, I know they need the money, but aside from that, are there requirements that the city should sell businesses water?
That's a good question. I mean, we named the city as a real party in interest to our lawsuit to basically, allow the city to protect its interests. If it did want to say, we want the ability to sell Foster Farms water, or we're actually grateful to have the opportunity not to have to sell them water. And they declined to get involved. So they just said, basically, they submit to the court's jurisdiction, whatever the court orders, they will abide by. but they're not otherwise getting involved. So we don't have a great sense of kind of Livingston's position in all this. I mean, I think there is that history there between them where they know that Foster Farms has abused water resources in the past, but I can't really speak to, why Livingston might continue to do it or might do it despite the degradation that it causes. I'm sure economic concerns are paramount, but beyond that, I'm not sure. And they haven't told us.
All right. So I think that kind of